Hey home bakers, it's Jack here at bakewithjack.co.uk, and this week we're shaping up cinnamon buns. Roll that theme tune! Hello to you and welcome back to the Bake with Jack YouTube channel, where I changed the format of this show more than I changed my underwear. These past few weeks I've been absent from here because I've been knuckling down on a top secret project I think you might like next year. And while I was, I filmed a little bit of myself shaping up cinnamon buns in the hope that you might learn something if we watched it together and I casually talked you through exactly what I did. Cut to the table. Here we join me at the table, and this is just after the first rest. So we've mixed it, we've kneaded it, we've rested it, puffed it up, put flour on top of the dough and flour on the table. I'll put a link to the full recipe for this in the comments underneath for you. It is one from the blog, a long time ago. I get it out of the bowl upside down, sticky side up, and then I'm going to flour it nicely and push it down with my fingertips like this. The idea is we're going to use a rolling pin to roll it into a rectangle. And you might think, how do you roll a circle into a rectangle? Well, I'll show you. If you roll the middle bit like this, turn it, we roll the other one. Now we've got 4 bumps in the corners. You see what I mean? And now with the rolling pin, I'm just going to roll out those bumps, and they are our corners. The thing with rolling out dough or reshaping dough at any stage is that we are redistributing the dough. We can't just pull those corners out because they will spring back in because of the elasticity. We have to redistribute the dough to a new place, deliberately making those bits and then rolling them flat in the correct shape to help us turn that circle into a square or rectangle. This is exactly the same as pastry. I give a dust on top and rub it around. I'm moving it around on the table the whole time to make sure nothing is sticking to anything else. I've rolled it sideways, which is a massive crime, by the way, if you're doing pastry, but fortunately here I'll get away with it. I'll turn it around and roll it the correct way to redeem myself slightly. And you'll notice everything tries to go back to that kind of circular oval shape. I'm rolling it further beyond its means because I know it's going to come back a little bit as it rests up. And again, I'm just going to mark out those corners one more time as best as I can. We've got nice and big here, about 30 centimetres I believe, by about 45 centimetres probably. Metal rulers are like the handiest thing to have in the kitchen for stuff like this. And next we're going with the butter. It's room temperature, and the idea is I want to make it really soft and spreadable. So with my scraper, I'm just going to soften it, kind of beat it I suppose in this bowl to soften it up as much as possible. If it's not soft enough, you'll put it in your dough, try and spread it out, you'll get chunks everywhere, and it might even tear the dough where it's kind of stuck on that chunk of butter, which is not what you want. Here I'm softening it as best as I can with my scraper, and it's not quite as soft as I would like. So I'm going to take it and give it a couple of seconds in the microwave just to soften it up really well and make it super spreadable. And you can see how the difference already. I've not melted it, I've just made it a little bit softer. As soft as it can be before it's melted, basically. And now, before I apply it to the dough, I'm just going to make sure it's not sticking because it's been sitting there for a while. The longer it stays there, the more risk it is of sticking. And I'm going to apply my butter from a height, because it's always fun to do it that way, like this. Boom! Get all of it out of the bowl. Make sure that bowl's nice and clean. And I'm going to spread it around with the wrong side of the scraper initially. That's the curved edge. We need the flat edge. So let's get that edge all clean. The flat edge, that one there. Spread it all out, and this bit's actually really pleasing. If you start from the bottom to the top, we're going to leave a strip bare of butter on the bottom because that's where the dough's going to stick to itself when we roll it up later, which you will see. All that butter off of the scraper as you can. It's tricky to get the last bit off, but you can do it. We'll leave it there. Get rid of the bowl, and here I've got my cinnamon sugar. I'm going to sprinkle the whole lot over the top. There's quite a lot here, but that's the whole point of a cinnamon bun. Now I'm going to give my scraper a wash so it doesn't stick to my scraper, because I'm going to use that to spread the sugar around. And again, with a flat edge of the scraper, I'm going to spread it out nice and evenly right the way to the top, leaving that bottom strip bare of any butter and any sugar. Some of it goes over the edge, but don't worry too much about that because we're going to rectify that in a minute, and that's even quite pleasing too. Watch this. Around the edge like this, just like you're hoovering around a rug, right? We're not going to waste any of this sugar, we're just going to put it all back on the top like this. Now my palm's going to press it all down to stick. It's not all going to stick completely, don't expect that, but we're just doing our best to compact things down so that when we roll it up, it makes it a little bit easier with minimum sugar spilling out all over the place. One quick tidy up again, if you missed it earlier, pop that back on the top. I'm going to start my roll from the top. I always avoid saying we're going to roll this tightly because we don't want to roll it tightly. Because we're dealing with bread dough here, it's elasticy, it's stretchy, and so if you say roll it up tightly, it's common to want to stretch it up the table as much as possible and then roll it up. You're never going to get it tight because it's always got more room to stretch, if that makes sense. So instead, the idea is to roll it up firmly with minimum kind of air pockets and big empty gaps inside, if that makes any sense. Those last pieces of sugar we can pick up and put them back in before we seal it off. And I'm going to make a couple of corners here on the edges because I want to roll it down and for it to meet that bottom edge and make a nice, neat, long seam around the edge. Now I'm going to turn it around so you can see what I'm doing here. I wouldn't normally do this, but just so you can see, I'm pushing it down into the table, onto that seam to pinch that seam nice and tight. Now, because you can see what I'm doing here and I can't, I haven't actually done it properly, and when I come to roll things, I've noticed it's come apart. So I'm going to turn it back around the right way so I can see it and do it properly. Firmly pushing down with my thumbs all the way down the edge to finish off that seam nicely. Now I'm just going to even out that sausage, make it nice uniform all the way down, and with a scraper I'm going to decide where I want to cut it before I cut it. Now I'm going to get 14 cinnamon buns out of this, and to do that I'm just going to mark out the middle and then 7 either side. When I'm marking out the 7 either side, because it's an odd number, you've got to guess where that middle one's going to be, what I'm doing here. See that? Guess where the middle one goes, and now I've messed it all up. And the good thing about doing this is that when you count it and you realise you messed it up, you can just rub off those lines that you made with a scraper and start again for the middle. So mark off the middle, 7 either side, that's an odd number. I'm going to guess where the middle one goes, there. And then I go mark 3 either side of the middle one, making 7. Does that make sense? Mark out the middle one, bang. 2 cuts there, making 3. 2 cuts there, making 3. 3 plus 3 plus 1 is 7. You get the gist. It's 14, trust me. Now, if I wanted to cut this with a knife, I'd have to transfer it to a chopping board. And if I cut it with a scraper, I'm at risk of squashing those lovely spirals. So to make the spirals just perfect, I'm going to use this, which is cotton thread. I'm not going to pretend like I invented this technique. I certainly didn't, although if you're new here, of course, I completely invented it. This is completely my idea. I use a piece of thread like that. I pull it off with my bare hands because I'm so strong, and I'm going to just fold it in half to double it up like this. I'm going to wrap it around my fingers. I'm going to slide underneath my dough sausage where that mark is. Snip. Isn't that satisfying? And I've just snipped it off nicely. So watch it again. I slide underneath my dough sausage to where the line was, cross it over on the top, pull it tight, and it snips it really nicely. And if this didn't just make those swirls perfect, it's actually a really nice and satisfying and pleasing thing to do. So keep cutting them all the way down the end, and you'll get your swirls just perfect. The last one is always slightly dodgy. That's just the nature of the game. If you manage to roll it up really neatly, they'd all be exactly the same. I find the end one's always a little bit dodge. Line them all up like this on a table because it's really pleasing to the eye. It's just satisfying. And then you can count them, make sure you've still got 14, which we have. There is a little bit of sugar left on the table, a little bit of flour too, and that's okay. We're not going to waste it. I'm just going to use a couple of scrapers to scrape it all back together like this. And we're going to use it. We're going to put it in the dish or on the top. In this scenario, I've chosen myself these nice enamel dishes. Bang. We'll pop it in there so that we don't waste it. I've got parchment paper in these. I always bake on parchment paper so nothing sticks. It's so easy to get it out. And now I'm going to arrange them nicely in here. Now this is stiff parchment paper inside of a round tin. I'm doing my best here to make it fit the tin nicely without faffing about too much, and it doesn't really work. So here's a little tactic I'm going to show you. I'm going to screw it up into a ball, and this does 2 things. One thing is that it allows us to get it nicely into the corners a little bit better, and secondly, because it's all crunched up around the edges, it makes for a really lovely rustic cinnamon bun photograph for Instagram, which we all like so much. In we go with our cinnamon buns, and when you're dealing with food, odd numbers always look better than even numbers. That's just the rule of life. So here I'm putting 6 in, which is an even number. I appreciate that, but I'm putting 1 in the middle and 5 around the outside to give the illusion of odd numbers. I don't know how it works, but it looks better that way. I don't know. I put 6 in there. I'll put that sugar back on the top that I saved from earlier. Screw this one up. Line this one exactly the same as before. And I'm going to put 6 in here as well. Nicely. 1 in the middle, 5 around the outside. Now, if I was thinking ahead, I would have cut this into 12 pieces, so I'd have had exactly the right amount for my tins, but I wasn't thinking ahead. I cut it into 14 for some reason. I got 2 left over. I'm going to flatten these down with my hand like this, just to make sure they're kind of uniform height. And I'm going to let them prove up underneath an upturned bowl. I'm making a kind of proving chamber, if you will. I always find sweet things dry out a little bit more than other things, so instead of a cloth, we go with an upturned bowl. It fits really nicely and creates a nice little enclosed space for it to puff up nicely. I've got 2 left over, so I'm going to find something nice to pop them in. That looks good, doesn't it? One of them is clearly bigger than the other one. I have noticed that too. So we're going to swap that middle one out for a plump middle one there. So we've got 2 exactly the same size. Isn't that wonderful? Put the tops back on that. Faff around a little bit, and there's a little bit of excess sugar still on the table. We're going to just sweep that up like this with a couple of dough scrapers over the edge and sprinkle it on the top so we don't waste it. A rectangle plastic box would be perfect to make a proving chamber for this one, wouldn't it? I wonder if I've got one. There it is. I'm going to leave these here and let them puff up. Get yourself a timer, stick it on the top so you don't forget to check it along the way. An hour and a half or so later, depending on how warm it is where you are, they should have puffed up nicely like this. Check it out. The swirls look perfect because I cut them so nicely. They're nice and puffy and soft. Take them as far as you can. The softer you get here, the lighter your bun will be. I'm going to load them up in the oven without the basket, just like the recipe says, baking it with plenty of steam. And here they are fully baked. Don't they look wonderful? They've puffed up a little bit more in the oven. They haven't come up in the middle too much like a Mr. Whippy ice cream. And if that does happen, it's just their way of telling you you could have let it rest and relax a little bit longer, or perhaps you rolled it a little bit too tighter at the beginning. To be quite honest, I couldn't care less about stuff like that. Now all I'm going to do next is get myself some simple white icing. I could have done cream cheese icing, I could have made a vanilla frosting, I could have literally made anything I wanted. You can pipe it on, you can spread it on. I'm just going to slowly drizzle it over as best as I can with a spoon like this. Doesn't that look wonderful? I'll link the full recipe for these below, and let us know your top cinnamon bun tips and variations by joining in the conversation in the comments. If you've enjoyed this video, please click that thumbs up. If you're new and you like what I do, consider subscribing, and if you didn't like it, subscribe anyway, because, you know, like I said, it's probably going to be different next week. Thank you so much for being here as always, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon. Bye-bye. And there you have it. I hope you learned something from each and every one of my bread making tips over the years. I try and get them out whenever I can, whatever format they arrive in. I hope you got some value out of this one. Don't forget, if you want Bake with Jack bits and bobs in your kitchen at home to help you with your bread making, you can get them at bakewithjack.co.uk/shop. See ya.